So I'm going to go ahead and make the smooth transition to our opening panel, which is why everyone's here. I want to invite three speakers to the stage. I'm not going to read bios, but I'll read just their titles. Laurie Fowler is the Executive Director for Public Service and External Affairs, the Odum School of Ecology, the University of Georgia. Laurie's a board member of Second Nature as well. She's a mentor of mine. Nathaniel Smith is the founder and Chief Equity Officer for the Partnership for Southern Equity. And Katharine Wilkinson is the Vice President of Communication and Engagement for Project Drawdown. And just as a quick framing, this session is titled Multi-Sector Action for a Just Transition. And we often think of climate solutions in different buckets. You know, you have the technical bucket, and then you have the social or cultural bucket. And what I think we'll hear is that those are artificial and inextricably separate. We cannot separate those two. It's not possible to do that. If you separate them, they will fail. And I'm really excited to hear about how this conversation is going to go. So thank you so much. Katharine, I'm going to welcome you up to the podium. I'm the worst with logistics. So I forgot to say, there are notepads on the table. So what we're going to do, instead of doing the pass around mic at the end of this, we're going to have you write down your questions on the notepads, and as you have them, hold them up, and we'll have staff come around and pick them up. Okay, let's do that again. Katharine Wilkinson.
Thank you. I think what that means is that if you want to give a speech in your question, you better start writing now, because we've got a lot of handwriting to go. Good morning. It is a little bit daunting to be the opening act for Nathaniel, but I'm gonna do my best. There we go. Imagine this is on many of your minds, and if you haven't seen something like this on your campus yet, it's probably coming, thanks to the growing youth-led climate movement. And shifting capital away from the sources of the problem and restricting their blood flow is absolutely something that should be top of mind and top of conversation. But we also desperately need to talk about reinvestment, redirection of capital into the climate solutions that are already in hand, the practices and technologies that we have today that are already working, they're already proven. But we need, according to our analysis at Project Drawdown, something to the tune of $25 trillion invested in those solutions over the next 3 decades. The good news is that the savings from operating those solutions over their lifetime is upwards of $100 trillion, up to $145 trillion in one of our scenarios. So this is good news, but it means we've got to move a lot of cash and we've got to move it quickly. I'm actually much more comfortable in the language of poetry and novels and playwrights. This quote from James Baldwin is not about climate change. This is from a conversation he had with Margaret Mead about the future of democracy and a post-consumer culture. And he says, "We've made the world we're living in, and we have to make it over." And we could spend the rest of this session talking about who the we is that's made the world we're living in, but the we that has to make it over is really clear, and it's all of us. This is essentially the task at hand, and the work of Project Drawdown really focuses on what are the tools in our toolbox to do the work of making over the world. And as we'll kind of get more into as the session unfolds, the questions of equity and just transition in the use of that toolbox has everything to do not just with what solutions we're deploying, but how, right? Who benefits, who decides, how are drawbacks managed, are they managed at all? All of that becomes really, really critical. It's helpful just to ground ourselves in the contours of the challenge. These are the sectors of the global economy and their relative contribution to global emissions. And science, of course, has made it really clear what the work is. essentially we need wholesale transformation of every aspect of the global economy, and we need it now. Not to start out on a daunting note or anything. The other piece that's really important and that often gets neglected is nature's role here and how we can collaborate with, uplift, support the carbon cycle and nature's carbon sinks. So only about 59% of the emissions that we're sending up into the atmosphere stay there. Oceans and forests and wetlands and peatlands are doing incredible work to help try to keep things in balance, even as we throw things so wildly out of balance. And all of this, ultimately, is about how do we reach drawdown. Drawdown is a point in time when this ever-rising of concentration of greenhouse gases actually stops rising and begins to decline on a year-to-year basis. It's also a critical turning point for humanity, and it's a point that we need to reach just as quickly and safely and equitably as we possibly can. So Project Drawdown set out a few years ago to answer the question, can we even get there? Can we reach drawdown with the solutions that we already have? Can we do it by mid-century, essentially in line with what science tells us we need to do? And if so, how? So that's the work that we've been doing. We're getting ready to release on Thursday the first big update to our work since we published the book Drawdown in 2017. So if I'm awkward, it's because I've been in editing cave. But this is really what we try to answer in our work. And we have sort of shifted a little bit the way that we present solutions. The Drawdown Solutions Framework, as we're now calling it, really aims to help us wrap our heads around the landscape of climate solutions globally. And it has three pieces. Reduce sources, right? This is the big one. It's the one that's atop of all of our minds. How do we bring emissions to zero? Also, how do we do that other side of the rainbow, so to speak, uplifting nature's carbon cycle through supporting natural sinks? And also, how do we improve society? There are critical areas of fostering equality that also have important ripple effects for the planet. So this is what it looks like. This is a sort of a sneak peek of the results that we are sharing Thursday. I don't think anyone outside our team has seen these. On the reduce sources side, so those who are familiar with Drawdown, kind of number one, it was like, here is every tree in the forest. The trees are all still there, but what we've also tried to do is sort of tease out a bit more the stands and the groves and how they relate to one another within the ecosystem. So across reduced sources, you see, again, solutions that map to those four major sectors of emissions in the global economy. Also critical solutions on the sink side, but as you can see, they're nowhere near as big as the opportunities around stopping emissions before they go up. And then also, as I mentioned, climate solutions are rarely just climate solutions. Most of them have co-benefits for health, for food system resilience, for the possibility of advancing equity in our cities and communities. And there are also some areas that focus primarily on fundamental human rights that end up having positive ripple effects. Indigenous peoples' land tenure is one of those, also access to high quality voluntary reproductive health care and education. So this is sort of what it looks like if you add all of this up. We have run two different scenarios in this round of our work. Scenario one is super ambitious, at least compared to today's political climate. But it does not reach drawdown until the 2060s. We would see concentrations of greenhouse gases right around 540 parts per million of carbon dioxide equivalent in 2050. Scenario two is a heck of a lot bolder, plausible, doable, but incredibly ambitious, and it would get us to drawdown in the mid-2040s. So we would see concentrations of greenhouse gases peak right around 490 parts per million. What does that mean in terms of temperature rise? Again, in scenario 1, we'd see more temperature rise, more greenhouse gases, temperature increase of about 1.85 degrees Celsius in 2060 on a path to see 2 degrees of temperature rise by century's end. Not where we want to be. In scenario 2, obviously temperature rise continues beyond the peak in the greenhouse gas concentrations. We would see a peak warming of just over 1.5 degrees through the decade of the 2050s, more in line with where we want to be. So there are essentially 2 conclusions to this work. One is we can avoid catastrophic warming with the climate solutions that are already in hand. And there are solutions in the mix that are not included in this work, either because the data's not there, we haven't been able to find the right senior fellow, whatever. So on the one hand, sort of source of courage, source of possibility. On the other hand, reaching that possibility, right, realizing the scenarios that math tell us is doable, means that we need immense ambition and bold action. And for me, this brings up kind of a paradox of emotions, right, of sort of a sense of possibility on the one hand and a sense of kind of sheer terror about how much needs to change and how much we need to do. I think that that sense of overwhelm is with all of us at the moment, and it's part of why I think these kinds of gatherings are so important, because I don't know how we continue this hard and diffuse and long-term work with very little sense of impact unless we're doing it in community. The 2 drawdown scenarios may feel incredibly unrealistic today, especially that more ambitious scenario, and you can go into all of the details around assumptions and whatnot in technical materials on our website come Thursday. But it's important to keep in mind that what seems politically unrealistic today is physically and economically realistic according to our analysis. So we have some really important things going for us. There is actually a path forward, and then the question, I think, is how do we bring into alignment that physical, economic, and political possibility so that they're working together towards drawdown and towards a future where we come back into balance with the planet's living systems. So even though Project Drawdown thinks a lot about solutions, I find myself thinking a lot about accelerators. Right? Would that solutions would scale themselves. That would be amazing. We need really good approaches to removing barriers and accelerating implementation and expansion. And what gets exciting for me when we think about both solutions and accelerators is you start to see this incredible diversity of footholds for action for all individuals, all institutions all over the world. This question of like, what can I do? What should I do comes up all the time. I think the answer is finding our unique footholds in the ecosystem of transformation. None of us can do it all. None of us can do it alone, but we can all find a place where our sort of unique skills, resources, superpowers have a role to play. So what are these accelerators? I think about sort of 7 big ones. Some of them are more diffuse. They feel a little more fuzzy. Some of them are sort of closer to the site of impact, where you might actually pull one and immediately see a movement in solutions. Oftentimes, I think in the climate space, we have neglected how critical some of these accelerators are. We've never had a good cultural strategy, by and large. But so much of this is about shifting stories and values and what we believe is possible or right or good. All of that is in the realm of culture. Building power, of course, right? When we have entrenched interests that are working against the evolution of climate solutions, we need people power as the counterpoint to those entrenched interests to actually advocate for and make possible the trajectory that serves our collective future, rather than the interests of those who have, frankly, known a lot but cared very little. Setting goals, we're seeing more and more goals come into alignment, actually, with the scale and the scope of the challenge. That, to me, is exciting. We'll see if action backs them up to bring them to life. Of course, we have to alter rules and policy. Of course, we have to move capital. There are a whole host of behavior changes that get entangled in these solutions, and improving technology still has a role to play. There are some really hard to decarbonize sectors, particularly sort of heavy industry, aviation, right, where we still don't have the answers. Across most of this challenge, we've got the solutions in hand, and I've become really fond of the saying that now is better than new when it comes to climate solutions, because we simply don't have time for cycles of innovation to play out. This is the publication that'll be out Thursday, and in true sort of word nerd fashion, I thought I might close with actually reading a passage from the review. We are living in a time of dramatic transformation. The basic physics, chemistry, and biology of this planet make that non-negotiable. Stasis is not an option. Society has a choice to make about what shape that transformation will take. Will we employ collective courage and determination and the legion of existing solutions to move the world away from widespread climate change and widespread climate catastrophe? Will we pursue climate action in ways that heal systemic injustices rather than deepen them and foster resilience, well-being, and equality? Who will we choose to be in this pivotal moment of human history? A transformation that moves us toward drawdown is possible, but it will require much more than the right technologies and practices being available. Genuine evolution is in order. Evolution in what we value, how we treat one another, who holds the reins of power, the ways institutions operate, and the very contours of our economies. This time of transformation also asks that we learn from cultures and communities that have sustained human nature symbiosis and regeneration for centuries and even millennia. At times, this can all feel like a draconian assignment, but it's also an invitation into deeply meaningful work. Our purpose as human beings in this moment is to create a livable future together, to build a bridge from where we are today to the future we want for ourselves, for all of life, and for generations yet to come. With commitment, collaboration, and ingenuity, we can depart the perilous path we are on and come back into balance with the planet's living systems. A better path is possible. May we turn that possibility into reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Katharine, for making it clear and plain. This is truly an honor for me to have an opportunity to share with you this morning. I wish I could have brought the sunshine this morning to you all. I heard that the rest of the week will be better. So I definitely would encourage you all to hang out and get to know Atlanta. It's a very, very special place. It's also very special for me because I spent 7 years at an academic institution focused on this specific conversation, working with the administration and faculty and students to move a new agenda forward. And so for me, it is wonderful to have an opportunity to address you all, and I hope that the conversations that you will have will lead and move you beyond just conversation. We've had enough conversations. now it is time for us to act. And last but certainly not least, welcome to Atlanta, the logistical home of the civil rights movement, the place that birthed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the place where we have many, many incredible institutions of higher learning. I am a product of the Atlanta University Center, and more specifically, Morehouse College, the alma mater of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Atlanta is a place of contradictions, a place of great possibility, but yet also a place of tremendous inequality. A place that once a year is focused on by the world as we celebrate the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But at the same time, it is the place where a poor child in the city of Atlanta only has a 4% chance to rise out of poverty. It is the place and home of Coca-Cola and Waffle House and Chick-fil-A. But at the same time, over 70% of our African American kids in this city live in concentrated poverty. That is the reality of this city. Now, why in the world would I begin there? Why would I begin talking about the challenges that Atlanta is facing versus the opportunities that you have as endowment managers and sustainability directors and other individuals that are involved? Why didn't I start at your institutions of higher learning and the things that you can do within the walls of your institution? I began there because I believe that you cannot realize carbon neutrality while being at the same time neutral when it comes down to justice. You cannot begin the process of moving forward to ensure that you play your part in advancing sustainability when you only choose to focus on 2 of the E's and not all 3. Yes, it may be easier to talk about sustainability from the perspective of our environment and our economy. But until you move forward and put equity at the center of the work that you are doing, then you will not fully realize your goals and the goals that we have collectively to move towards a more carbon neutral society. We're all connected. Dr. King called it the network of mutuality, that we are bound by a single garment of destiny, that one effect, while it may affect one directly, affects us all indirectly. What do I mean by that as it pertains to you? Well, it's simple. You can't focus on water efficiency in your schools when some of your staff members are still trying to figure out how they're going to pay their water bill. You can't focus on the expansion of your schools and not understand its effects on traditionally disinvested communities and how you can play a role in advancing gentrification in those communities without thinking of ways to ensure that the residents of those communities are benefiting from your expansion. Yes, it may feel good to have a volunteer day at your institution where you take your students out to plant trees. But if those trees are not connected to ensuring that the people who may benefit from those trees will have more of an opportunity to be more actively involved in ensuring that their communities will be more resilient and sustainable, then what is this all for? We are in challenging times right now, times that will not allow you to be just comfortable doing good work inside of your schools, times that require you to again go back, and I was so appreciative that you utilized James Baldwin's quote, because there's another quote that I utilize on several occasions from James Baldwin. He also says that history is the present. That we cannot move forward unless we acknowledge our contribution to that brought us to where we are today. What is the role of your institution of higher learning in advancing some of the challenges that we are facing today? From who helped to build your campuses to how your endowments were grown. All of that may be connected to things that you're not necessarily proud of. But you cannot walk away from that history if you are committed to advancing a more resilient and sustainable society, because history is the present. We cannot move forward in talking about the challenges that we face around extreme extraction, when on many occasions our faculty and students go out into communities and extract knowledge from disinvested communities without leaving anything behind. We cannot talk about the extreme extraction that creates the carbon challenges that we're facing by the utilization of fossil fuels without talking about the extreme extraction of the labor of indigenous communities and communities of color in driving an economy that was primarily built on free labor. You cannot disconnect the two. If we are for a better tomorrow, we have to be willing to place everyone in that future, that everyone is a part of our environment, and everyone has a chance to not only benefit from the work that you can do, but also participate in it and engage in it in ways that will create a community, an ecosystem of both common and uncommon allies that can work together to move our efforts forward. So what am I asking you to do? I'm asking you to look at equity, not just as a what, but a way. How can you begin to look at equity as a journey and not just a destination? How can you begin to look at the individuals who work at your institutions who are not just faculty, but people who work in your cafeterias, who have to leave every day and maybe go home to environments that are exacerbating the climate challenges that we are facing because they live in substandard homes or have to drive to work every day because of the lack of a comprehensive transportation system. Or your workers that may live in communities where it's easier to buy a honey bun than a head of lettuce. What is your role in creating a more resilient community beyond the walls of your institution? What is your responsibility as endowment managers or individuals that are part of a board of trustees to remember what Baldwin said about history being the present and leveraging the resources that you've been able to accumulate to create not just a more sustainable campus, a more resilient campus, but a more resilient and sustainable community. That is your responsibility. And let me be clear, I am not looking at this from the perspective of charity. This is not about charity. This is about your responsibility, and even more important, it is about our survival as a human family. That pontificating and researching and teaching and volunteering for anchor institutions in the 21st century, when we are dealing with the social and environmental challenges that we're facing today, is not enough. It is not enough to be featured in periodical journals. It is not enough to be featured on the top 10 list of the most sustainable campuses. It is not enough to just be good stewards of the resources that you may have. Now is the time for you to think, yes, but it's also time for you to act, and it's also time for you to reach out and connect to your broader ecosystem. Now, this is not going to be easy to do because of some of the histories of your engagement in your communities in the past. The extractive nature of the relationships that some of you have had with the communities that you are a part of in the past. When you go in, some individuals will not trust you. They will remember some of the mistakes that your faculty and students have made. But that's okay. Because at the end of the day, change moves at the speed of trust. That if you're able to create an environment where the community will trust you and be willing to lock arms with you, you will then be able, and you talked about acceleration, you will be able to speed up that change through what we call as an organization relationship acceleration. That is the acceleration of relationships that will create the type of change that we want to see in community. So how can you use your teaching, research, service, endowments, and the ability to convene as a way to accelerate the relationships that we need, both in common and uncommon areas, to advance resilience, to advance sustainability? That is the question that you have to answer. Because at the end of the day, the rest of our country does not look like this room. It is a lot more diverse. And everyone has various challenges that we have to work to overcome together. What is your responsibility in ensuring that the rooms that you're in are more representative of the community that you want to influence? That is the only way that change will realize itself. Not by us sitting in a room together and coming up with ideas that we think are great, but may be horrible for the broader community because we have not been inclusive of their history and the perspectives that they may have as it pertains to moving forward. The new watchword now is resilience. And one of the things that I always try to encourage the folks at the universities that I engaged in to understand is that no one, regardless of how many PhDs you may have behind your name, has a monopoly on knowledge. No one has a monopoly on knowledge. And I see that even more so with this conversation that we're beginning to move forward on around resilience. There's no one in this room or nothing that can be told to a working mother on the east side of Atlanta who is trying to make sure that she can keep the lights on and feed her family about resilience. There's nothing that we can tell some of the individuals that made sure we had breakfast this morning about resilience. I submit to you there is more that they can tell us about resilience than we can tell them. But we have to create the conditions for that to occur. And it's not going to be easy because it is going to force us to own some of the challenges that we've helped to create through the decisions that we've made in the past. We're going to have to run towards various challenges that we've tried to insulate ourselves from and ask other people to solve problems without fully understanding that those challenges will continue to influence our ability to engage in an effective way around issues of climate, like the challenges that we're facing around the world, not just in America, around income inequality. The challenges that we're facing, and in particular in this country, but the South, around racial inequity. The challenges that we're facing around all of the other inequities that we're facing, they're all connected to the work that we're trying to do around managing climate change. We can't move forward without our willingness to not only acknowledge that, but to use our respective resources and relationships in ways that will bring new people to the table and also create the conditions where people can benefit from what we have in ways that they have not benefited in the past. So I just wanted to leave you, and I'm sure we're going to have an opportunity to chat, but there is a way forward. There is a way forward. We do have a chance to get to where we want to go. That said, we will not get there unless the individuals who are not connected to your work become a part of your work. We won't get there until the people who may be surrounding your institutions see yourselves as a partner in creating a better quality of life for them and their future generations. We will not get there. We will not get there until you all are able to connect the dots between the importance of not just having a more sustainable campus, but also a more sustainable community. And last but certainly not least, we will not get there until courage becomes the primary driver and equity becomes a primary pillar for the work that you all do both individually and collectively around sustainability. That is my charge. That is my deep belief. And again, thank you so much for allowing me to share. Thank you.
Some questions, but first I wanted to give y'all an opportunity. Is there anything that you said that Katharine, Nathaniel, that you would like to ask about or comment on specifically, or vice versa?
Well, I mean, of course, Katharine, I mean, your talk was so insightful, and I'm just so encouraged that the Project Drawdown effort is moving in this direction. One of the questions that I had was really around when you talked about power, right? The process around really creating the type of people power that we need to advance this work. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just your perspectives about the broadening the table and really helping to facilitate the engagement of communities that may not have necessarily been engaged at first around the work.
Yeah. So I'll say, it's definitely not our area of expertise at Drawdown. We're a super small team of number crunching nerds and an even smaller number of sort of wordsmithing nerds. But for me, I think where I am learning the most about this in the climate movement at this moment is from youth, and is from the Sunrise Movement in particular. There's such a shift in the level of, I think, awareness of intentional community building, right? Recognizing that there is no building of power unless we build community and relationship first, of making space for the kinds of trust-building conversations that you talked about. And I think just the insistence, it's been really distressing to me to hear some of the discourse kind of within the kind of status quo climate space of like, particularly triggered by the Green New Deal, right? Of like, oh, whoa, this is like, we're trying to do too many things here. And correcting that equity is not somehow secondary to survival, equity is survival. And if we're not understanding these things as connected, then we haven't done a deep enough analysis of the roots of the climate crisis. Again, sort of typical climate discourse is like, well, this happened with the Industrial Revolution, right? Well, where did the Industrial Revolution come from? Well, really, if we dig deeper, the roots of the climate crisis are in colonialism and patriarchy and white supremacy. And that's where our sort of myths of separation and extraction, I think, come from. So if we're not going there, then we're gonna be staying in a space where I think A, our strategies aren't gonna be right, and B, I think we're not gonna be able to do that kind of people building power. But that's a place where I would look much more to y'all, because you're out of the nerd hovel doing that work.
I escaped.
Yeah.
I think it's always funny to me when in particular intellectuals that talk about how we got here, always start with the Industrial Revolution, but they never talk about the antebellum South and the role of cotton, right, as being our first real global export, and how cotton was actually, again, the whole economy was built and driven by slavery, and how that connection between the extreme extraction of free labor has to be connected again to the extraction of our resources in the earth. Definitely. We have to do that. And shout out to my young leaders, Erica and Michael. They're here, so I definitely appreciate you lifting up young people, because I truly believe that no movement can sustain itself or even be successful, in my opinion, without young people. So thank you.
I think for me, well, I wrote down a lot of things. That was the first time I'd heard that Baldwin quote about history is the present. And it left me thinking a lot about the history of the institutions where I was educated. Sewanee, where Laurie and I both have some roots, right, was an institution founded by slaveholders with money from slaveholding to educate slaveholders. The original Highlander Center was a town over. I don't have any sense that ever the two met in that era. And then graduate school, my time at Oxford was funded by the spoils of raping and pillaging the people and places of Southern Africa. these are like gnarly histories, right, that are embedded in the places where we are. And so I really appreciated that connectivity of that history as the present, and also that I think it is a great it's a great way to take pause about the ways in which we are currently writing history that the generations that come may look back and feel disgusted and ashamed by. Yeah, that's. So I'm curious kind of how you think about the healing work, I guess, that is embedded in that insight about history being the present.
I mean, it is central, and really the only way that healing can begin, in my opinion, when we talk about history being the present, is that we have to work to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to tell the story.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that on many occasions, the greatest crime is that everyone is not given an opportunity to tell their story and what their perceptions about history are. Yeah. It's one thing to talk about the beauty of the Eisenhower Act and the highway systems that we have that provided mobility for people to get to the suburbs. But I guarantee you, the communities where the highways went through, the communities where the highways were built on top of, which were primarily African-American communities in Atlanta and in other places around the country, may not necessarily have the best recollection about our highway system, or the challenges or opportunities that were created as a result of the GI Bill, or FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, where a great deal of wealth was created through government subsidies for white people, when black GIs and black families were not given an opportunity to benefit from the Federal Housing Administration loans. And even more so, FHA encouraged racial segregation in terms of residential development. So we have to democratize who is telling the story. Yeah. And I think that there's real power and real opportunities for healing when we do that. But again, until we're willing to own our history as a collective, I, in my opinion, believe that we won't be able to move forward in a direction in terms of where we need to go. Yeah. Thank you.
Nathaniel, in terms of some of the work that the Partnership for Southern Equity is doing around energy issues, specifically in Georgia, how are you involving communities who are most affected by decisions of the PSC and things like that? You mentioned earlier that you want to see those people in the audience and having a voice. How do you begin doing that?
That's right. Well, first and foremost, I mean, the work that we do around climate justice and energy issues is very much consistent with the other areas that we work, in that we're not a climate and environmental organization that does racial equity work. We're a racial equity organization that is advancing climate justice, right? And when you place that at the center of the way that you look at the work, then the outcomes will be very, very different. And so for us, first and foremost, it is really important for us to look at power as a double entendre, right? That it's not just about the power that is powering the light bulbs in this room, but how can we begin the process of creating political power in marginalized communities where they will be in a position to speak for themselves and hopefully eventually run, right, for positions like the Public Service Commission. And so we just actually had our third class, the beginning of our third or second class for our Just Energy Academy, where we have leaders of color from Alabama, Mississippi, the coast, and Georgia that are learning about climate issues, centered in a way that is centered in racial justice. So again, we're building this ecosystem of civic actors. We're also working with our rural electric co-ops, again, organizing and encouraging co-ops to think from a regenerative perspective as it pertains to their policies around energy and building power again of the owners to engage in decision-making as it relates to their respective boards. Sometimes it also means that we have to sue people. And so we have, had to engage our private utility around key issues that we felt were detrimental not only to the planet but the people who were in proximity to some of the decisions that were made by the utility, i.e. The development, the expansion of Plant Vogtle, which is a nuclear power plant in Georgia, or the decision to increase the costs of utility bills for individuals that can't afford it. So for us, it's really about how can we advance those issues, but also how can we be the facilitators of a new civic ecosystem through the engagement of what we have organized called the Just Energy Circle, which consists of about 20 organizations now from around the state who are working with us to advance racial justice within the context of climate justice and sustainability. So we stay pretty busy in that space, yeah.
Catherine, I had the pleasure this past Friday of spending time with the early heroine and mentor of mine, Lois Gibbs. And she, as a young 20-year-old mother, first started wondering if her son's epilepsy could have in some way been caused by the fact that she was living on top of a 21,000-ton Love Canal hazardous waste facility. And she is known as the mother of Superfund, had a lot to do with the development of our country's hazardous waste laws, and I was delighted to find that her organizing and collective action group is now doing a lot of work on climate change. And in fact, Friday before last, she was arrested with Jane Fonda and Gloria Steinem out in Hollywood. So I know that your newest project relates to women leaders, reflections and actions on climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. I should say I'm also learning a lot about from what Mary Robinson calls and names herself as angry grannies for climate justice, which she gave me a pen and I wear it a lot when I give talks because I feel like it sort of gives permission to be the inner angry granny that I think I actually am. I think that for me, it has taken a long time to find a place within the sort of climate movement broadly that feels good to me. And a lot of that has been because, like so many spaces, the climate movement is infected with patriarchy. My experiences from being a white woman in that space, and the stories are far more horrifying from women of color in the climate movement. And so getting connected with more women leading in this space kind of left me with this clear sense, of how many brilliant voices and visions are not getting the airtime that they deserve. And also that people are pretty shattered by working in this space a lot of times. And there's a real need for community building and sort of collective healing and grieving, right? Just the sheer enormity of the challenge is enough, right, to need space for that. So Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who's an amazing marine biologist, policy nerd, climate justice activist from Brooklyn, and I have worked together on retreats for women climate leaders, and right now we're co-editing a collection of writings by women climate leaders because, for better or for worse, part of the sort of pathway into quote-unquote thought leadership in this society is through publishing. Lots of women are too busy doing the work to take time to write a book, right? Marianne Hitt's out there running the Beyond Coal campaign. Jackie Patterson's leading the climate justice work at NAACP. They don't have time to write a damn book, right? So partially, Ayanna and I were like, well, how can we kind of short circuit some of that and create a megaphone for a whole bunch of women working in this space and actually do it in a way that feels more like the way we're approaching the work, right? Which is not as solo voices. It is as kind of a chorus with different perspectives and in dialogue and trying to figure it out together. And it's been really cool. So there are 38 essays in the collection. And what's been so delightful is as we're going through them to see like, and then this one's shouting out to that one, and that one's shouting out to that one, and they're saying, send money there. And like that's, to me, like that's the relational web that actually makes good work possible. So the book is sort of one piece, and it has to do some, with who's telling the story and who's setting the trajectory of where we should go and why. But ultimately, we hope that it's kind of another spark for doing that community building work and hopefully getting a lot of money to those women and their great work. Yeah.
Ruby, do we have time? Couple minutes.
So for both of you, how can we create the pace and magnitude of change needed, especially given...
It's working? Okay.
That's it.
So for both of you, how can we create the pace and magnitude of change needed, especially given our current patchwork of so many autonomous, independent, and competitive college and university campuses?
Will you repeat that one more time? I was like thinking, and then I lost the last phrase.
So given the current patchwork of so many different autonomous, independent, and even competitive campuses, how do you think we can create the pace and magnitude of change needed?
So I struggle a little bit with this question because there's such an interesting obsession with urgency and scale in the climate space that I think sometimes gets the best of us. Where we can connect up efforts to help them move along more quickly and more successfully, definitely we should do that and have that. But I'm not so convinced, especially when we think about like how ecosystems work, that these like localized efforts within their own contexts and are not actually maybe the best way to get the job done. Yeah, that's more of a philosophical answer than an actual answer. Let's see what Nathaniel has.
No, I mean, I think you're onto something. I mean, I would just say start in your own backyard. I mean, I think that a lot of change can happen, and I hate to kind of go back. I'm a big kind of believer in the fact that a lot of our answers can be found in the past if we look for them. And the civil rights movement did not begin as this national effort to change the voting rights position for communities of color, right? Or the civil rights condition of African Americans. It actually started when a strategist and leader by the name of Rosa Parks decided not to get up, right? But had a whole strategy behind not getting up, right? Mm-hmm. And that the ripple effect, right, from the Montgomery bus boycott created the Montgomery Improvement Association, which then became the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And a young man by the name of Dr. King was positioned and thrusted into leadership. And so I think a lot of times we forget that real transformational change begins from the ground up and not from the top down. And so I would just encourage the academic institutions in the room to just start in your own backyard. There are many opportunities to create innovative strategies, new relationships, new policies, right in your own backyard. And I promise you, if you start there, if you do it right, the ripple effect from your engagement will trickle to other places, not only in your respective cities or regions or states, but around the country.
So thank y'all. On that note, we will end. I can't imagine two more wonderful speakers to
thank
start
you.
us off, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.